Okay, everyone, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Pierce, and I'm the director of the Transnational Literature Series at Brookline Booksmith, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and your host for today's conversation. The Transnational Series focuses on stories of migration, the intersection of politics and literature, and works in translation. I just want to offer a quick Zoom webinar tutorial. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a few icons. One of those is a Q&A icon where you can enter in your questions at any time during the conversation. Another button will get you the chat window. That space is there for you all. Please feel free to chat during the event. I will be in the chat as well, dropping in useful information, including links to books by our authors. We do make every effort to keep these events free to attend in the hopes that you'll purchase the featured books from us. So thank you in advance for taking a look and supporting independent bookstores. And finally, you can see us, but we can't see you, so relax and please enjoy the conversation. Today I have the great honor of introducing Nana Darkoa Sekyiamah and Ayesha Harruna Attah, here to discuss and celebrate the release of The Sex Lives of African Women. Nana Darkoa Sekyiamah is a feminist activist, writer, and blogger. She is the co-founder of Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women, an award-winning blog that focuses on African women, sex, and sexualities, and she writes frequently for The Guardian, Open Democracy, and elsewhere. The impact of her work has been documented by CNN in a film titled Not Yet Satisfied, and in 2016 she won a prestigious Hedgebrook Fellowship. She has contributed to anthologies such as Feminist Parenting, Perspectives from Africa and Beyond, as well as the Routledge Handbook of Queer Africa Studies. And her short stories have been published in It Wasn't Exactly Love and The Pot and Other Stories. She is also a sought-after facilitator, speaker, and commentator. She lives in Ghana. And today's moderator, Ayesha Harruna Attah, is a Ghanaian-born writer living in Senegal. She was educated at Mount Holyoke, Columbia University, and New York University. She is the author of the Commonwealth Writers Prize nominated Harmattan Rain, as well as Saturday's Shadow, The 100 Wells of Salaga, which is currently translated into 4 languages, The Deep Blue Between, a book for teen readers, and Zainab Takes New York, a rom-com. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, El Italia, and Asymptote, among others. I'm so thrilled to have them here together in conversation. And now, Nana Darkoa and Ayesha.
Thank you so much, Piers. Hi, Nana.
Hey, Ayesha, good to see you.
Good to see you too. So wonderful to see you on the screen after a week of doing a talk in person. And I'm so excited about our chat tonight.
So am I. So excited.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling really good. This is actually my first virtual tour event, so that's super exciting.
Oh my goodness. Yay.
Yeah. Since the Sex Lives launched in the US.
Yes, well, major congratulations on this really beautiful and groundbreaking book.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Honestly, I think we should start off with a reading. Let's just introduce a wonderful audience to your work.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So my book is in 3 sections, and I'm going to read from the self-discovery section. And I'm going to read Bibi's story for anybody who wants to follow along. I'll read from the beginning. I usually like to tell people a little bit about the person. So Bibi originates from Nigeria, and she identifies as heterosexual. I mentioned that because in each chapter, I have a little bit of an introduction. And, one of the questions I asked everybody was how they identified. So Bibi is a 35-year-old Nigerian woman. She identifies as cisgender and straight. Zach came to meet me at the taxi stand, and we took a motorbike to where he was staying. It was one of those big, fancy expat houses in Cotonou. I remember thinking, wow, it's so good to see you, to be around you, spend time with you. We went out for dinner, and when we got back, we both fell asleep. We woke up in the middle of the night and started chatting. Chatting turned to kissing. We started with closed mouth kisses, then open mouth kisses. I remember falling off the twin bed. We laughed, pushed the beds together, rolled over to one side, and continued kissing. He started to touch my boobs, stroke my clit, and started going in and out with his fingers. I had gotten an IUD before leaving for Nigeria, and when he was going in and out, it started to hurt. almost like he was hitting the IUD. Stop! He kept going. I got more and more turned on. He reached out for a condom and continued to kiss me. He tried to put his penis inside me and it wouldn't go in. I couldn't turn my brain off. Shit, what's happening? Why is this not working? What's going on? Is this still the right thing to do no matter what? It's not like he's my boyfriend, we're just friends. What are you doing? This was one of my fears. I just wanted it to happen. I wanted it to go in, get it over and done with. He was someone I really cared about. I was really turned on and thinking, let's go, let's do this. But my vagina was like, sorry, dude. I didn't want to say anything, but I had to. This is my first time. I'm feeling a bit worried and scared. What do you need? We'll take it slow. We'll take it easy. We'll make it good. I'm grateful that my first experience was with him. I wanted to feel normal and for it to feel okay, and it did. It had taken me years to get here, but finally at the age of 32, I had technically gone all the way. I had managed to do this in spite of all the voices in my head, in spite of the repression, in spite of a sense of shame. I grew up as a Christian in Nigeria, but when I moved to the US at 17, I became more Christian. I joined a church, got baptized, and joined a discipleship group. Sin was a conversation in our everyday discussions, the avoidance of sin and not doing sinful things, which included thinking about sex. We were told, you don't want lust in your heart. In a strange way, it heightened my awareness of sex, but I knew it was something that I could not do until I got married. I had never had sex before, so for me, it wasn't a big deal. I wanted my virginity to be a gift when I got married. We were told that sex was one of the perks of marriage. I did not want to go to hell and really wanted to get closer to Jesus. But some of the women who had been sexually active before joining the church struggled. I remember one of the girls in the church telling me, if I need to pee, I'm going to go right away, because when I hold it and finally pee, it gives me a similar release. I remember thinking, whatever you need to do to keep your salvation, girl, that's what you do. Subsequently, I went to a women's college that was progressive in certain ways, but I never paid attention to any of the conversations around sex because I was still really religious. I went through college and never kissed anyone. Around the same time, there were changes happening in the church. It had been so strict and people were having difficulties. There was a sermon which will stay with me forever, and the preacher said, sex is not necessarily the enemy. It is a natural thing. However, as Christians, you're not allowed to have it until you're married. It's one of the perks of marriage. Once you're married, you can do it all the time. So I thought, sex is the gift I'm going to get if I hold out. What I struggled with when I was in grad school was that all my amazing, interesting, and cool friends would not go to heaven unless I preached to them so that they could have a change of heart and become Christians. That was really hard for me to swallow. And I started to question that. And when you question one thing, you start to question other things as well. And I'll end here.
Beautiful. That was so beautiful. And I love the way you read it. And it makes me want to start with a question about sex, because this is what this reading is about. But why is sex so intriguing? There's another person in your book, Gabriella, who actually calls it overrated. She says it's overrated, but it's like just another way of connecting with a person. Yet everybody seems so fixated on it. You have a blog dedicated to sex. You've written a whole book dedicated to sex. So what is it about sex that human beings find so fascinating?
That's a great question. I don't think it's a question that anyone has asked me before. I think there are a couple of things that make sex intriguing. In our part of the world, right? Obviously, I can't speak for everyone in Africa, but like most of the people I interviewed from across the continent, first of all, sex was something they were really not allowed to speak about, to question, to discuss as young people. It was this thing, and all you knew was you were not supposed to do it, right? And it was just this forbidden, it was a forbidden fruit, right? And I think anything that's forbidden becomes intriguing, you know? And just the mere fact that there was a lack of openness, a lack of frankness, you know, it's still scandalous to talk about sex, right? Like there was a bit when I was reading, I was like, oh, did I pick the right bit to read? I mentioned penis, you know?
Yes.
It's just a word, right? But
Yeah.
it just feels so scandalous still. Even to me, sometimes it still feels scandalous. And I think that's why it's intriguing.
Yeah.
Because
but even beyond our parts of the world, even in so-called progressive places, there's still this fascination with sex. But like us, if you think about it, like Gabriella said, it's just another way of connecting with another human being. And yet there are laws where sometimes two people cannot have sex, two consenting adults can't have sex. What is it at the root? It's a human act, like even the pastor said, even if he pushed it to marriage. So it intrigues me. I was just wondering if you...
I think sex is actually very, very political, right? People like to say it's a personal act, it's private, but I think it's really political. And you get the perfect example. If it wasn't political, you wouldn't have so many states trying to pass legislation to control who people love, who people to choose to sleep with. You know, in Ghana right now, there are a number of parliamentarians who are trying to push through basically a bill banning literally everything but heterosexual sex, literally banning any type of identity other than, you know, a heterosexual identity. And that speaks to the politics of sex and how much, you know, I think it's still feared. Yeah, there's still a lot of fear where sex is concerned, especially anything that is outside of missionary, man, woman, within the confines of marriage.
I could go on forever about that question. And I'm even wondering if you've seen a shift in sort of like the attitudes to sex. Like if you think of Ghana, where both of us are from, for instance, was there ever a time where people were less scared about talking about sex or less scared about even being sexual beings? Because that's the impression I get. Or has this always been the case?
No, I feel like the fear of sex is actually a pre-colonial construct. And I really see a huge difference between the much older generation, especially people who lived in pre-colonial times. And I would say like our mother's generation, right? Our grandmother's generation are completely different. So for instance, I interviewed my grand aunt, and when she died, she was 100 years old. So I was interviewing her in her 90s. And I was so shocked to find out that she had 3 husbands. She had 3 husbands, right? And in this day and age, it seems really controversial in Ghana if you got divorced. But then this was a woman who had 3 husbands, and it wasn't anything scandalous, right? So I feel like a lot has changed. And part of what colonization brought to us in Ghana, because we were colonized by the British, who were, especially in that time, you know, from the Victorian era, they were really strict. In fact, the laws that we have in the country, you know, which is the root of the homophobia here, it's actually from British colonization, right? Because they banned unnatural carnal knowledge. Who's to say what the natural carnal knowledge is? So a lot of it, I think, is a Victorian construct. Also with increasing religiosity on the continent, increasing fundamentalism, you know, across various religions. Yeah, that's
so
why
I think
we are in today.
Yeah, but what I love about the work you're doing, Nana, is you are pushing back against this. And I think your blog does an amazing job of doing this. Can you tell the audience about your blog? What is it? Why you created it? And is it in any way linked to this book? Can you tell us?
Yes. So in 2009, my best friend Malika and I started Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women. That's the name of our blog. And we really started it because we just kind of had this eureka moment where we were like, oh my goodness, we had nothing like anything approaching comprehensive sex education growing up, right? And we were like, no, we want to create a space where African women can speak openly about sex and learn from one another and share with one another and learn to just take more pleasure in their bodies. And that's when we started the blog. And very, very quickly, it became a collective space where we were encouraging other African women to share their own stories. And so the connection between the blog and the book is, I guess, the connection is just my interest and passion for just creating space for more conversation about sex. And through the blog, we've had the blog for over 12 years now. Through the blog, I realized that, oh my goodness, there are all of these incredible stories that African women have about sex. But somehow that's not what we ever hear, particularly in mainstream media. So in mainstream, particularly Western media, I feel like there's a focus on African women as, you know, like these passive women, or these women who are stuck in miserable polygamous marriages, or these women who are constantly pregnant, or these women who have experienced FGM. And, you know, I'm not saying none of that is true or none of that exists, but I feel like it's one side of the story and it's not the full story. And I knew there was so much more there. And so I thought, okay, why don't I just interview African women from as many countries as possible and put that together in a book, because that will really show the breadth and diversity of our experiences when it comes to sex and sexuality. So in a way, this is, you know, another project connected to my passion for creating more spaces to share stories around sex and sexuality from the African woman's perspective.
Great. And it actually segues nicely into my next question, which was, you interviewed 32 women for these stories. Like, where did you even begin? How did you find them? Yeah, just tell us.
In a variety of ways.
Yes, okay.
So the very first woman I interviewed was called Baba. Her story is in the book. And she had basically slid into my DMs on Twitter to, like, because she was confused about her sexuality, you know, and at the time I'd been thinking of doing this book. So we had been chatting back and forth, and then I was like, I'm writing a book about African women and sex. Can I interview you? And, you know, it was actually like the first time we met, all we did was drink wine and chat.
That's lovely.
And I know. And then the second time, you know, we actually had an interview, and then we met for a third time. But before COVID, I used to travel quite a lot for my work. And so what I'll do is every time I went into a different country, I'll try and find someone to interview. Even on holiday, I was constantly looking for people to interview. So I went to Sao Tome, for example. For people who don't know Sao Tome, it's a little island off the coast of West Africa. It used to be colonized by the Portuguese. So Portuguese is the language they speak. I don't speak Portuguese, but we had a great tour guide. And so I said to my tour guide, do you know any Sao Tomean women who would be willing for me to interview them? And I ended up interviewing a woman who we called Vera Cruz in the book. So I really just try to interview as many African women from as many different parts of the continent and the diaspora as possible. It was really important for me to also include the perspectives of African women in the diaspora. You know, I'm a Pan-Africanist, and so for me, I see people in the diaspora as part of us, part of the continent, and we're separated because of slavery, colonization, migration. And for me, this was also a way of reinforcing the connections we have amongst ourselves.
It's a great, how do I put it? It's a book that really shows a breadth of women. I've heard somebody describe it as an archive, which I'll come back to later on. But did you find, in writing about the diaspora, did you find certain themes that run through, or depending on geography, what was surprising about the stories that were from the continent versus the diaspora? Did you find any differences, or no?
I feel like there were more similarities than there were differences, you know, especially there were more similarities for people who were like second generation Africans, right, whose parents had migrated to, say, Canada, for example, because their parents were still very much trying to raise them like they would if they had been living in their home countries. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, for those kind of folks, you saw more connections with people on the continent. I guess the difference was, for some people, to the diaspora was a space where they could be more open because they weren't surrounded so much by family, you know, so that could also be the place where they could, in a sense, break free and explore. And Solange's story is an example of that, you know.
Can you
Solange,
tell us a bit about Solange? Sorry.
yeah, so Solange is a trans woman originally from Rwanda, spent some time in Canada, now living in Abidjan. So the story that she told me sort of traveled through Rwanda, traveled through Congo, which is a place that she lived, ended up in Canada. And Canada was like the place that she walked into a queer bar for the first time, and really came into her queerness. And there was something about being away from home, which allowed her the space to explore and to find herself. And then for her, it was really important to come back home and, to live her life as a queer woman on the continent as well. So that's a story that I also really love. Yeah. I think there is something about traveling that's freeing, that allows you to find yourself, that allows you to discover yourself. Yeah.
Wonderful. And tell us a bit about the way the book is sectioned into 3, big themes. How did you do that? Is this as you were writing, as you were interviewing, or is this something you wanted to do beforehand? How did it work out?
It wasn't something I had intended to do. So once I'd done about 20 interviews, I did this very geeky thing of putting everybody's name in a spreadsheet, and like not just sort of writing down, I guess I wanted to sort of analyze the stories I had, right? So I'd kind of write down for each person's story the words that kept popping in my mind when I thought of their story. And for me, it became very clear that there were, I guess, 3 broad themes that were really, really strong. It felt to me that there were a lot of people on the journey. And also there were lots of people who were physically traveling or had traveled. They traveled to find love, they traveled to explore a relationship, they traveled to connect with their partner. So travel was a really strong theme. But there was also like an internal travel that was taking place, right? And so for me, it was very clear that there are lots of people who were making huge efforts to discover themselves. And so it's like, okay, this is a theme.
Self-discovery.
Yes.
Okay.
And then there was also a really strong theme of healing. There were also a significant number of people who had experienced some sort of traumatic event, whether it was child sexual abuse or whether it was rape. And so there were also stories where people were, talking about how they had attempted to heal. And healing was very different for everybody. And also there's some people who, frankly, it still felt like they had to heal, right? This was something they had to do, but for whatever reason, this was still something that was pending in their life. And there were some people who I just thought, oh my God, you people, you're unicorns. Like you figured it out. You've got the magic sauce. We all need to take lessons from you. And I felt like these were the people who were living their best sex lives. They'd figured it out, they were super inspirational in how they were living their lives. I felt they were models of liberatory practice. And so for me, that was the theme of freedom. And that's how those 3 broad sections of the book came about.
All right. So maybe we take another reading, because I think the first one was from Self-Discovery, if I'm not wrong. So I think freedom would be a nice one to hear from now, and then we'll do the healing towards the end.
Sounds good. And I'll read from about the middle of Fatu's story. Fatu's a Senegalese woman, a bisexual Senegalese woman. I've always loved women. I love women's bodies. I enjoy their company. I love women just the way they are. I also think women can be complicated. And for this reason, I haven't had a lot of women friends. My first homosexual relationship was when I was a teenager. She was a girl in my neighborhood who was a tomboy just like me. Our relationship felt very natural. She dated young men just like I did. We started having sex without making a fuss about it, and while both of us were still in other relationships. We were just 2 young bisexual girls. Neither of us were the jealous type, and that was a great comfort. Our moms tried to separate us. They thought we were a bad influence on each other. We were both very stubborn. She had a motorcycle, and we would go out dancing at night, which used to enrage her mothers. One time she tried to organize a threesome, but it was a disaster. I think her guy hadn't taken her seriously when she discussed it with him. The three of us were in the room and he told her to leave and that he wanted to talk to me. When she left, he started to lecture me. He said, "Why are you doing this? It isn't right." I was confused and angry and had lots of mixed feelings. I started to cry and said, "You have no right to tell me what to do and who to do it with. If you want to talk to someone, talk to your girlfriend." I was 18 at the time. That put me off threesomes for life. Twosomes are complicated, but threesomes are 3 times more complicated. Freedom has always been important to me. In all my relationships, I would always try other men. Sometimes women too, but not that many, because I think relationships with women tend to become the most complicated ones. I found that most women were possessive and would not understand that I love them, but still want to sleep with someone else. When it comes to possessiveness, I think women are more fierce than men are. I never hid who I am. But whenever I initially told a new lover about being attracted to someone else, they would think I was joking. I would just keep saying to them, I am a free woman. I started most relationships while still in a relationship with someone else, but that same person would turn around and demand that I be faithful to them. I would just say, when you met me, I was with someone else and you knew about that. So I would just go for what I wanted. Sometimes we could talk about it. Other times it became a lot of drama. And sometimes people would say, I cannot be in a relationship like this, and would leave when I got attracted to someone else. But I never lied about my feelings, never. That was important to me. I don't want to lie about being free. And even my kids and sisters knew what kind of woman I was. Sometimes my sisters would say, it's against religion. My kids grew up with me. So although I didn't speak to them directly about polyamory, I lived my life and they saw it, even if it was clear to them that this is not what every woman is like. I think I am how I am because of my father. Although we never talked about sex, he was a free man. He was very open about his multiple relationships, even though my mom didn't like it. I admired my father for being who he was, for being different. He lived his life on the fringes. He was a doctor. And here in Senegal, medical doctors are considered part of the elite, but that wasn't him. He always made friends with people on the margins, mainly artists. He liked to live a simple life, spend time in the village, which is exactly how I am. I am not a city person. I am not sophisticated, and I think I got that from my father. When I was younger, one of my male cousins said, if a man is attracted to you, it's because they have something homosexual within them. When I was younger, I didn't look like a woman. I didn't dress like a woman. I didn't talk like a woman. I didn't behave like a woman, but I've never been confused about being a woman. I am a woman who doesn't want to behave like a woman just because that's what convention says we must do. As a child, my 2 younger brothers were my best friends, and my elder sister hated me. She was critical of me, always saying, you should not go out with that person. You should not behave like this. People are talking. She never leaves me alone, even now. When we meet at the airport to go on a trip together, and I'm dressed in a way that she doesn't like, she will go into her suitcase and give me something else to wear. She'll say, how can you travel from country to country dressed like this? Wear this dress, change your shoes. One time, I was carrying a plastic bag on a trip, and she reached into her suitcase and gave me what she considered a proper bag for a traveling woman. She's like that even now. I think I'll stop here. Yeah, let me stop here.
I wanted you to continue. I love that story. It's like, you're right. She sounds like a unicorn to me because I live here in Senegal and I'm wondering, wow, how does this woman manage to be so free in a society that is super patriarchal and doesn't stop letting you know? And I'll give a small example. I was at the border crossing between Senegal and the Gambia, which is a slice of a country. And I was wearing a dress and this man just stopped me and told me to cover up because he didn't like the sight of my legs. So how does Fatu manage to live so freely? Wow. It's impressive. It is impressive. But I also really like the way you read it, and I could hear this woman's voice. And it brings me to the question of the form. Why did you choose to write it this way? I guess there were many ways you could have gone about it. You could have had like a Q&A, like where we see Nana, the author, interviewing, these women to get their story out. So what made you choose this writing form? I don't think we can hear you.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
I really wanted people to connect with the woman I was interviewing. And I feel like doing first person really enables people to do that, to get into everybody's story and to actually hear the story from the person's voice. And I thought it would be more interesting. It was definitely more fun for me to write because I could just sort of like literally put myself in the person's shoes and write as if I was them. I really enjoyed doing that. It was a lot of fun. It also allowed me to ask people really, really intimate questions when I was interviewing them. So I'd say to people, obviously, this is a book about sex, and so I'm going to have to ask you a lot of intimate questions. And because I wanted to give, the reader a sense of space and time and place and what else was going on, I'd ask people, what else was happening at this time? What could you see? What could you feel? What could you touch? What could you hear? And so for me, it just felt like a really fun way to approach this book, and also a way to also enable the women to speak for themselves, right? Because I really wanted people to hear, see, and feel the diversity in African women's experiences.
Mm-hmm. That comes through very strongly. And I just speak some more about this process of teasing out the stories, because some of us are very reticent and shy, especially when it comes to a subject as, intriguing and as taboo as sex. Did you have some people who you struggled to extract the story from, or was it that the people who reached out to you were just open to tell their stories? What was that like?
I mean, there were many people that I also approached, right?
Okay.
So, because also I wanted that breadth. So there were some people I would meet. So for example, Laura, she is Black Brazilian and also Italian. And so when I met her, I was just like, oh my God, I need to interview you for my book. She was a complete stranger to me, but she had a lovely energy and we met at a party. And so, and actually people were really, really open, also because I give people the choice to be anonymous. So there are a few people who chose to use their own names, and, the majority of people chose to be anonymous, which is completely understandable.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that also allowed people to be true to themselves and to really share, because they knew that nobody would necessarily know who they were. And I would also say to people at the beginning of the interview, you don't have to decide now whether you want to use your own name, because I didn't want people to be hamstrung by the fact that they were telling the story about us themselves. I wanted them to tell the story however they wanted to tell the story, to be able to be open and honest, and then to decide afterwards if they have revealed so much they don't want other people to know, or whether they felt comfortable putting their names to the story. And I'd also say to people, you don't have to decide today. I can, come back to you in a month's time or in 2 months' time. Mm-hmm. And so I think that really helped people feel at ease. And at the beginning, pre-pandemic, there's some people I would interview, like if I was traveling in my hotel room, so it would just be the two of us. There are a couple of people I interviewed here at my home in Ghana. I finished the book during the pandemic, so then at the end, there were lots of people I was interviewing on Zoom. But I think I've just had a lot of practice about speaking to people about really intimate subjects, because I've been blogging about sex for so long. And because I've shared my own stories, people could also go online and read what I've shared. So they knew I wasn't asking them to do anything that I hadn't done myself.
Yeah.
And I think that made all of the difference in the world. And there are a couple of people, we had several interviews, not many, but there are a couple of people, I mentioned Baba, we had 3 interviews. Nura, who's another woman from Kenya who had traveled to Senegal, because she'd married a man online. We had 2 interviews. So you could have like one interview and you're like, that was my experience with Nura. You're like, okay, I feel like there's more to the story. You'd be like, I'll come back to you in like 2 months. And can we have another conversation then? And then you get a whole lot more. So that was kind of like my technique.
Okay, and from the moment the story came to you to the book's completion, how long did it take? Because you had 32 subjects, you interviewed people a couple of times also. How long did that take? And you were working full time. You became a mother as you were writing this book. How did you juggle it all?
It definitely wasn't a quick process, and I hope my next book will be much quicker. But it took me 5 years from when I started doing the interview to when I finished. Yeah, it took me 5 years.
Okay.
And honestly, if I hadn't got a book deal, it would have taken me much longer. There's nothing like signing a contract to deliver your manuscript by a particular deadline.
Yes.
You know, like get used to work harder. Yes, but like you said, it was also just because, you know, this was something I was doing whilst, like everybody else, living a life, you know, having a job, trying to have a social life, you know. Yeah.
And you mentioned very casually that you had written your story as well. I want us to talk a bit about your story. What was that process like? You couldn't have interviewed yourself, could you? How did it work out?
It was hard. So halfway through doing this, I realized I'm going to have to include my own story in this book. I can't be interviewing people about like all their deepest, darkest secrets, and then I myself will be kind of removed, right? That felt to me like
it felt exploitative.
Exactly. I'm like, you've got to put yourself on the line here as well, right? And then when I tried to write my own story, I was struggling. I didn't know what to write. And so I thought, okay, I need to follow the same process I have followed for other people. So I reached out to a friend of mine. She's also a writer called Valerie Barr. And I said, can you interview me for my book? So she interviewed me, and then I wrote my own story based on the interview I'd had with her. And I'm really glad I did that process because, to be honest, what came out was not what I'd expected to write. And I think there's something very powerful about the interview process when people ask you particular questions. It enables you to go deeper, enables you to reflect on things that you may not normally reflect about, you know. My story is in the healing section. I'd have loved to have been in the freedom section, but you know,
it's coming, I'm sure.
Yeah, but what came out was stuff that I think I still need to heal from, frankly.
Okay. Yeah. And this is great because I want to talk a little bit about healing now. These stories, especially in the healing section, were very deep and reflective, some of them very heavy. For you as the writer, how did you go in? How did you come out? What was your relationship like with these people who you had to extract very painful memories even? Some, it was even the first time some of them were confessing things to you. Talk about that.
That was hard. To be honest. I think when I started this book, I was a little bit utopian. I thought, you know, I'm only going to share these amazing, incredible stories that people have been telling me. But then actually, when you sit down and speak to people about the experiences of sex and sexualities, understandably, there's also a lot of traumatic stuff that comes out. And I don't think I had quite expected that, right? And so there's a way you need to hold the space to give people space to really just share. And like you mentioned, you know, for a lot of people, they were telling me stories that they had never told anybody else before. And so I feel like all you have to really do in that moment is to just give the person space to listen, to be a witness. But I think for me, what's really powerful is you realize that the process of sharing your story is also a way to heal. It's a way to actually look back at what has happened to you. And I really believe storytelling can be healing, you know. It was also part of what I've been encouraging people to do on adventures, to write about experiences that they have had, because I think the writing process can also be a healing process. And there were a number of people who said to me like, wow, it felt really good to be able to share this with you. And this has really helped. I've never spoken about it before. And I think that things we don't speak about can eat at us.
Faster, yeah,
they can fester and they can eat at us. And so that was good. But I know that there was a time where I was just like, whoa, I this is a lot, you know. I also realized that there was a particular question I was asking people that in a sense was triggering people to tell me about child sexual abuse. At some point in time, I stopped asking that question because I was like, okay, you know, I don't know how much I can continue to listen to this.
Yeah. What was the question? I'm curious.
The question was, what was your earliest memory of sex?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Okay. That just, yeah. Put pox all over my body. If like that question brings to mind a lot of abuse, it says a lot about our society.
It's scary. It's scary. I think many more women have been sexually abused than people imagine, you know.
Mm-hmm. 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 And then for you as the writer as well, how did you deal? How did you heal from hearing all these stories? Because in my head, it's taken in a lot of energy. Even just hearing you ask that question right now, like my whole demeanor, you know, was affected by it. And you heard these from not just one person, but several people. How did you come out of that?
I think for me, what was really good was for a lot of people, they had found ways to heal from that, and they'd found ways to deal with the trauma in different ways. You know, so there's a story by Selma, for example. Selma had become an activist, a writer, you know, because she had been raped, and that had motivated her to speak up against, you know, any sort of violence. And so, you know, that was empowering to hear. Like, she had taken a really horrible experience and, you know, used that to try and create a better world, to contribute to creating a better world. So I didn't really leave any interview feeling, okay, I was gonna say I didn't leave any interview feeling like terrible or sorry for the person, but actually there was one that I did. But in general, it felt like people were healing or had healed or were dealing with experience that they had somehow found a way to turn it into a positive. And also I just gave myself lots of space and time, you know. So if I did an interview that was difficult, I would just not do an interview for a little while, you know. And at some point in time, I literally did a call out asking people, saying I wanted to interview people who were living their best sex lives.
Okay.
What was funny to me, and that was a time when I was thinking, oh my God, I've heard too many depressing stories.
Mm-hmm.
What was funny to me was the first person who responded said, I'm not living my best sex life, I still want you to interview me.
Oh my goodness. You became a therapist.
and that was actually Maureen's story, you know.
Oh, so you did it. Okay.
I did do the interview, yes. And yeah, it's a tough story, but it speaks to an issue that actually is not in any other story in the book, right? It speaks to her experience as a Black woman in France, where on one hand, she doesn't feel desired, on the other hand, she feels exoticized by the white men she's had relationships with. And I'm really glad I did that interview because, you know, I think it's important to show all of the perspectives and experiences.
Yeah. Like, I'm just amazed that you have everything. A woman who's celibate, and you have all sorts of things. You have all sorts of experiences, I should say. So let's maybe read that story, and then I think it might be time for questions from the audience, if I am not wrong. So let's read that, and then we'll take some audience questions.
Okay, so read Maureen's story.
It's not Shanita's story.
Okay, Shanita's story.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. And Shanita is God, I can't speak now. Shanita is a heterosexual woman originally from Barbados, living in the States. I've been celibate for almost 1,000 days now. In that period, I have focused on loving myself, raising my son, and opening a salon of my own in Boston. If I hadn't chosen to stay away from men, I wouldn't have been able to achieve all of that in the last 3 years. Previously, I was so distracted by men, relationships, and desires of the flesh. Now I can see the rewards of patience and sacrifice. I've learned so much about myself. I never realized how much self-control I had for a start. I now know that I'm able to stick to my goals. I also love the new me that emerged. I used to find the old me annoying. She was a shopaholic, constantly spending money and partying. Being celibate was not just about sex. It was also about breaking free of all forms of distractions. And excuse me, let me drink some water. I used to find the old me annoying. She was a shopaholic, constantly spending money and partying. Being celibate was not just about sex. It was also about breaking free of all forms of distractions and delving deep into myself so I could understand why I used these as a crutch. I wasn't ever extreme when it came to sex. I wasn't a sexaholic, for instance. I was a serial monogamist, and I often found myself staying in relationships way after I should have moved on because of my desire for the other person. A few years ago, I was in a relationship with a man. We had fun, we had a lot in common, we also had a friendship. When the relationship ended, I had to ask myself some tough questions. Why do I constantly end up in this kind of situation? What is it about me that I need to change so that I don't end up with someone who doesn't want me as much as I want them? I decided to spend some time retreating into myself. I read a lot, I prayed a lot. I sat through many dark nights until I had a realization. I am the light. I am what I need in this world. Everything starts and ends with God, but through me. And so the only things that I can experience are those things that I allow to happen. I realized that I needed to take back control of my life. This meant that I had to focus on myself. I had to take some time away from people. This resulted in me pushing a lot of people away. Some of those were good folks, but that was just where I was in life at the time. I got really quiet, and out of that stillness emerged my 100 days of self-love practice. All I wanted to do in that period was nourish my body and soul. During those 100 days, I ate healthily, I barely drank alcohol, and I took myself on dates. At the end of the period, I decided to take a solo trip to St. Martin and Anguilla in the Caribbean. I had never traveled alone before. The mere idea had always been scary, and so I decided that I needed to conquer that fear. That meant dealing with mom guilt as I left my son home with friends and family. During that entire 100-day period, I also stayed away from men. The only men that were ever around me were purely platonic friends. That was how my celibacy journey began, as part of my practice of self-love. At the end of the trip, I decided that I wasn't going to have sex with anybody who wasn't worthy of me, and the celibacy vow that I had made to God. So let me stop there.
Thank you. I realized that that was also one of my favorite stories. I have a couple of them. I wouldn't bias the readers, but there's so many wonderful stories. And I think Shanita's is up there for me as well. So let me pass you some questions from the audience, and then I will come back to my list. So Greg says, thank you for sharing the stories for this conversation. You mentioned that you began the blog 12 years ago. How do you think things have changed since you began?
Oh, I think things have changed so much. So when I started the blog, for example, it felt to me, and also that was the feedback I got, it was very revolutionary. There were not a lot of online spaces where African women in particular were chatting about sex and sexuality. There are so many more spaces now, so many other blogs, podcasts. I mean, I can shout out some of my favorites, like Hub of Love and Action for Queer Women, which is like a queer women's collective platform. There's The Spread. You know, there are also so many Instagram accounts. So it feels now that there are a lot more spaces, especially online spaces, for African women to connect with one another, to learn, relearn, unlearn when it comes to sex and sexuality. And so that for me feels like a change. Yeah, that for me feels like, yeah.
It makes me also want to ask a question about like, yeah, it seems like there are more resources for people who have questions, for people who want to share. But at the same time, it feels like, at least in Ghana, where we're from, there's also a clampdown on any kind of openness. Is that your impression? Like as one thing is growing, the other as well. It's like,
yeah, I mean, I feel like, you know, the backlash is just that. It's a reaction to the kind of progress people have made. You know, it's a reaction to people being like, oh my God, the queers are taking over, you know, like people feeling more free, being themselves, taking up space. Then there's a reaction. So for me, backlash is also a sign that actually people are doing great, and people are like expanding spaces and, you know, creating more openness, and people are reacting to that. Yeah.
okay, that's a good way to think about it. Yeah. All right. So Laurie asks, did the women you talked to review their stories before you published? And what has been their response to the publication of the book and seeing their stories in print?
The woman I interviewed did not review their stories. I actually told people, some people asked, could they review their story? And I was like, no, because also, and I'll tell you the reason why. Like, you know, when you interview someone, you can go in all sorts of directions, right? And so based on the conversation, I was crafting the story based on what they had told me, and also based on what for me felt the most compelling. And also, I think when you interview people, sometimes you hear something that they may not even see or recognize in themselves. And I wanted to be true to that. I didn't want to like present everybody in like a perfect light, right? Because we're not perfect, and that's not interesting. But I think as human beings, we have egos, and we will all want to massage a story to show us in our best light. And I did not want to do that. And so I also told people, you know, I don't plan to show the story to you before it's published. Is that fine? And everybody said yes, you know. And so that was the one thing I was a bit nervous about, like what would be people's reaction be? And actually it's been positive. So that's made me very happy. I haven't heard back from every single woman, but every single person has been sent a copy, and nobody, for a start, nobody's called me to complain. And in the UK, the book was out last year. And actually those who have gotten in touch have loved it. I've even had 2 women join me for online events. I also had one woman who was anonymous say to me, you know what, I'm in a different place now, and the next edition, put my real name there.
Amazing.
You know, so it's actually been really positive. And I think that's also because a lot of the women, part of the reason why they did this is they actually felt it was important. They believed in the politics of the project. And also everything I put there was true. You know, I have the audio to prove it.
Exactly.
So like I put words in anybody's mouth, so nobody, I think that's the reason why nobody could turn around and be like, oh my God, you said this, right? I didn't.
Yeah. And what has the general reaction been to the UK publication? It's come out, you've had copies in Ghana and I think on the continent.
It's been extremely positive. I mean, I have been pleasantly surprised about how well it's sold across the African continent. And many bookshops on the continent, you know, listed it as their bestseller for 2021. Nice. So that's actually been really amazing. I think it can be a little bit anxiety inducing as an African to publish a book in the West, because, you know, the fear is, will it get to my people? You know, but it really did. So I think my UK publishers did an amazing job in that regard. And I'm super excited that now we're publishing in North America too.
Yes. All right, Greg has another question. He says, what do you expect or hope to change in the next 20 years or so? Do you see or foresee big generational differences in women's attitudes and experiences?
That's a great question. I feel like even now I see, you know, huge generational differences. Again, I'm going to use an example from Ghana because this is where I am. Some of my friends and I joke how we don't know like any queer woman in their 40s or 50s or even 60s, but we know lots of queer women in their 20s. You know, I feel like young people are so much bolder, so much more themselves. and that's really, really inspiring. And I think we're only going to continue to see that. We're only going to continue to see more young people take up space, own who they are in every area of their life, including when it comes to sex and sexuality. And so I guess what I'm hoping will change is I'm hoping as societies, it's hard, right? Because I also think we're experiencing a huge backlash. And I think the conservatives and sort of fundamentalist forces are really, really organizing to restrict rights. I mean, we see this everywhere, including in North America. So I do think we have like a huge, I guess, cultural war ahead of us.
Yeah.
I believe those of us who are radical are on the right side. And I think you can't stop at then that its time has come, and I think young people who are the future want a more open world. They want a more free world. They want to be free. They want other people to be free. And so, yeah, like my hope is freedom for all of us. I tend to sign my book as, this is for our collective freedom. And that's what I want to see in 20 years, collective freedom. That's in beautiful. Every area of our life, not just sex, every single area of our life.
That is really beautiful. And yes, I think hopefully the next generation can save us. I hope so.
Absolutely.
So I think we will end very quickly with what comes next for Nana, and then we will close.
What's next? The next book.
Get to writing.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for an engaging evening and telling us about this beautiful, really, really important archive. And North Americans, you are in for a treat. Sorry, this is the wrong cover. Please hold up yours, Nana.
The right cover.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you both so much. This conversation for me has really mirrored all the things that I love about the book. It was powerful and necessary and radical, and also like deeply beautiful. So thank you both for being here and for everyone tuning in. And we will go and wish you all goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Piers, for organizing.
Absolutely.
Thanks everybody for being here.
Bye-bye.